All right, everybody, welcome to episode 4 of the NPStudents podcast. This week, we talked about what to do with the people on the other side of our view. Meaning if you are kind of just paying attention to anything in culture right now, you see a lot of angry people and a lot of strong opinions on pretty much everything. And so we had a conversation around, our opportunity to either fight to be right or to fight for relationship, meaning we can make all of our points known and feel like we checked a box and we can feel good about ourselves, or we can choose to listen to those on the other side of us and fight for our relationships. And we said, if you choose to do the second one, you're going to learn, you're going to grow, and you're going to have much deeper relationships as well. Because if you're in a relationship with just about anybody in the world, any friendship, any relationship, any family relationship, for any period of time, you're going to bump into things that you guys disagree on, and they may be small, they may be big, but you can't go very far with somebody unless you learn to understand with somebody who has just a different perspective or a different view on the world than you do. And so we're going to expand on that in this conversation here today. And to do that, we are joined by our transit director, Matt Keeney, and a friend of both of ours and roommate of Matt as of a couple months ago now. You guys have a really great setup too. I love it. Christian Price is here with us for the first time on our podcast, which I'm so pumped about. So before we get into some of the serious stuff, I had a couple of examples in this week's episode that I just think are worth discussion. One was, for example, when you talk about people who see the world differently than you, I talk about, I don't understand people that are Popeyes over Chick-fil-A. And when I mentioned that pre-podcast, Christian looked at me with a look of confusion, and he said his father is somewhere screaming in the world, like he knows as I said that. Do you have any defense of the pop? Like, why would you go in that direction?
So my dad kind of makes a tradition, at least once a week, Popeyes. At least. Got to. Maybe twice, maybe back-to-back days.
A weekly tradition.
Yeah.
I like that. I usually think of like yearly when I think of tradition.
Yeah,
it's like we have a tradition every week. I love that. Yeah. Well, I know people with daily Chick-fil-A traditions. So true. I get that. Yeah. So what was funny, just to like come clean on that is I made that statement and I haven't had the Popeyes chicken sandwich. So when I say that I'm pro Chick-fil-A, I really am speaking to a world I know nothing about, which is interesting. I also mentioned on there Michael Jordan and LeBron James. And look, if you don't care about basketball at all, one, I think you should learn. But two, you can skip forward just a couple of minutes here. Don't cancel the whole podcast if you're bored by this. But there have been several times around the office where Matt and I, who are usually calm, rational people, I think people would describe us that way. I don't know, maybe that's too far, but and we have gotten heated over this LeBron and MJ conversation, and specifically the Last Dance kind of sparked that over the last couple of months. Yeah, because when that came out for me, and I'm completely unbiased and purely rational on this. When that came out for me, I actually felt stronger that LeBron is the greatest of all time. Yeah. Like, as I watched Michael in that, I thought fierce competitor. I thought he was completely entertaining to watch. I thought it was great storylines and stuff. Walks away and comes back and all that. Yeah. Fantastic. But as I watched all the footage of him play, I'm like, that's like one aspect of LeBron's game. Like, LeBron just can do so much more than that. And I'm watching him leave. He leaves, and then his team makes the Eastern Conference Finals again the next year. Like, LeBron's teams turn into middle school teams when he goes away.
The Cavs especially.
You know what I mean?
Old Cavs.
Yeah. And here we are, his first healthy year with the Lakers, and they win the West. I mean, this stuff just happens all the time with him. So I just felt stronger, but I know, Matt, you had the opposite experience.
Yeah, no, and this goes perfectly into our episode content, too, in terms of how we see the world differently. You and I both watched The Last Dance at the same time, and I felt the complete opposite in terms of watching The Last Dance. Michael Jordan is hands down the greatest basketball player who has ever lived. Here's what I'll say about LeBron, okay? He got robbed of the MVP this year. Definitely should have won MVP.
Yeah, and every year for the last 15 years, but that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Definitely got robbed of the MVP. He is the most athletic basketball player who has ever lived. Probably the most athletic athlete who has ever lived. So I'll say that about LeBron James. In terms of pure basketball skill, though, one-on-one game, Michael Jordan's taking that all day, every day. LeBron's bigger. I feel your energy right here. LeBron's bigger. LeBron is stronger. But in terms of pure basketball skill, pure basketball, play, Michael Jordan's got that.
Do you have anything to say, Christian?
So I too watched The Last Dance, and for me, I watched Michael Jordan go up against mailmen. These guys were so unathletic. The plays that they ran were
They're
so
like drinking
basic.
6-packs of beers at halftime. Like these guys are like, it's just a different
terrible.
time.
Yeah.
So compared to athletes, real-time athletes, LeBron dominates.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I hear the one-on-one argument, and I always get confused by that because it's a 5-on-5 game, and I know this is heresy to MJ people, but I think LeBron would win one-on-one.
Me too.
He just stick his butt into him. Like, there's nothing.
Drive.
He's just so much bigger than him. He's so much bigger. I know. I hope Michael doesn't hear this podcast because he won't care about me. He's not going to come after me.
He's not going to listen to this podcast.
But yeah. Multiple times now we've referenced famous people that I know are not listening.
You never know where it could be shared.
That's true.
I want to share one stat with you, Matt, that I just think is interesting.
All right.
So, I don't think any time matters more in the playoffs, right? We're almost done, guys. Hang in there with us. So, in terms of all-time points leaders in the playoffs, okay, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 guys ever in the history of the NBA who have scored in the 4,000s. Okay, then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys ever that have scored in the 5,000s. Okay. Nobody has ever scored in the 6,000s. And there's one man sitting alone still playing in the 7,000s, and that's LeBron James.
Yeah.
The man's going to hit 8 or 9 by the time he's done. It's just not even close. Yeah. And that's the second best thing he does. Yeah. I mean, he's a better passer than he's a scorer. It's
a better teammate too.
Yeah. The leadership, the defense. We got to move on. Matt, I don't know if you got any final word here.
No, I don't think anything I'm going to say. It's just you're going to shut it down. You're going to pull up another stat on your iPad, and then it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
He also came into the last thing. He came into the league when he was 18. Right, so he had more years, and so I'll say that I think LeBron is an amazing athlete. Yeah, whatever. Well, let's move on.
We should do a separate podcast on that.
Just that.
Right? Yeah, like DM us if you want to hear that, and we're gonna get 1, and we're gonna get 0. Anyways, here we go. So we're moving on to more serious things that really do matter. One, Matt, because this is relevant to our conversation today. One of the kind of worldviews that you had flip a little bit was your story in terms of how it is that you came to North Point. So part of the reason I wanted you to be part of this conversation today is because the couple of times where I've seen you share that on stage, and if people, were in the room for those, I mean, those were like emotional, super memorable experiences for people. You've done it like at a camp or two now, and it's just really powerful. So that would be one example of like you have a worldview, you have a way that you see the world, you listen, you connect with others, and your worldview changes. And so, maybe not the whole story, but in a couple minutes, could you just kind of summarize that journey of middle school, some of the middle school challenges, how it is, and you came to be a part of North Point?
Yeah, absolutely. So try to make this as brief as possible, but moved here when I was 8 years old, never really went to church growing up. My parents didn't force church on me or anything like that. I was socially awkward. I was also incredibly short. Still am today. But one of these days, right? And growing up, I wasn't really a social kid, so I didn't really make a ton of friends through elementary school, and that led into middle school. And middle school was one of those times where everybody got bigger but me. And so I was, bullied verbally by people in my class and throughout school, but also verbally, physically bullied as well. And I got into a lot of fights. I didn't really know how to handle my emotions. So when someone was picking on me verbally or, physically or anything like that, I would get into a ton of fights throughout school and whatnot. And it got to the point where, like I said, I grew up never going to church. And so I was like, I don't even know if God's real, but if he is, like, this is not what I want to be a part of. Like, why would a God like allow these things to happen to me? And by the end of 7th grade year, it got so bad that I was like, I don't even want to go to public school anymore. I don't want to be around people. I just don't feel like I fit in here. I don't want to be a part of this. So homeschooled my 8th grade year, which was awesome. Like it was really cool. My parents, were so amazing and all that stuff.
Now
and
everybody's homeschooled.
yeah, right now I can relate with y'all there. But and then I went back to public school for my 9th grade year. Go Rangers, Vista Ridge. And the first day of high school was a little bit more of the same. I think people started to recognize, like, where was that kid for a year? I still kind of experienced a little bit of the verbal bullying and all that stuff. And came lunchtime, and I have a sister who's 2 years older than me. And she's amazing. Love you, Megan, if she's listening. And she had a different lunch than I did. And so I realized really, really quickly that I had nobody to sit with at lunch. And if you go to Vista, you know how big the courtyard is. And I just kind of took a little seat at the courtyard and forgot what I was, PB&J or something like that my mom packed me or whatnot. But I just was like looking out, and I felt incredibly alone in that moment, in terms of just seeing everybody else make connections. And high school is such an amazing place, middle school too, to make connections with the people that you're around. And I was looking out in the courtyard, just felt incredibly alone in that moment. And then as I'm thinking, as I'm eating, as I'm just kind of like in this little place of feeling alone, someone taps me on the shoulder. I look up at him, and he asked me to come sit with him and his friends at lunch. He knows that I was sitting alone, comes and asks if I could sit with him and his friends. And so that's exactly what I did. I don't know how I said it. I was just like, yeah, sure. And so I just kind of went. And this guy was also a part of the baseball team as well. And throughout all my freshman year, he was a year older. He was a sophomore. We just became really tight. Really close. We did, most everything together. Every Saturday night we were at somebody's house, hanging out, playing video games, whatnot. And about a year into our friendship, we were staying at somebody's house. I don't remember, but he was my ride. And so it was a Saturday night, and usually on Saturday nights he would just drop me back off at my parents' house, but he asked me this Saturday night, like, hey, would you want to go to church with me in the morning? And I was still out on this God thing, the idea of God. At one point I was like, I even hate God. And so I was just like, sure, I'll try it out. I'll just kind of see what this is about. But if it's more of the same, then I don't want to be a part of it. So we pulled up to an elementary school the next day, and we were one of the first people there because this guy was a part of the setup team. So he was a part of setting up, just the kids' environments and the auditorium and things like that. And it was Parkside Elementary, and it was North Point. So North Point was my first real church experience. And before I even sat in a service, I was helping set up and whatnot. And as soon as I saw Buck's hair, as soon as I heard the music, as soon as I saw the real community aspect of North Point, I fell in love. And a couple weeks later, the same guy invited me to Inside Out. That's where I got to meet you. And it was an absolute just amazing experience. Later that summer, I went to boot camp. That's where I heard the gospel clearly communicated for the first time, and I really understood God's love for me and everybody in the world. So I placed my trust in Jesus that week, and really got connected with you, Jordan, that week as well, which was amazing. And it was all because of this one guy stepping out of his way to come find me at lunch. And so that's kind of my story, and it's changed the entire trajectory of my entire life. And like you said before, this guy is now my roommate, and he's sitting next to me, and that's you, Christian. And so, I've said this to you privately. I've said it publicly to people when you're not in the room, but I just feel like it's a good opportunity to say, dude, you have absolutely impacted my life in a lot of different ways. And it means more to me than you'll ever know. So I really appreciate that. It's my allergies that I'm crying.
Yeah, it is allergy season. So ragweed's up, and that's mine. Yeah, I feel that with you.
Yep. Was that brief? Was that short?
That was brief for you and I. Yeah. For you and I, that was efficient. Yes. Yeah, so we talk about the power of an invite all the time. We talk about the ripple effect of that. Here you are today, our middle school director, directing people in one of the hardest seasons of your own life. That's extraordinary. And there's no way that Christian could have known that when he walked up to you and invited you, that day. Christian, do you remember that? Do you remember seeing him alone? And do you know why you went over and invited him to sit with you? Or
Because I think I met you first in baseball
class.
Because
it was baseball, then lunch.
Then lunch. And so I met him before. I was like, oh, he's pretty cool, whatever. And I saw and I saw him sitting by himself, and we always sit together. We have maybe half of the whole, super long table. And so I just said, there's extra space for him. So I think we actually scooted people over. I think you sat next to me. And then he sat next to us the whole year, and then hung out every weekend. And like he said, it just took off from there.
He did say pretty cool or whatever.
Yeah, pretty cool. I didn't know whatever.
Yeah.
It has his moments a little bit.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel that. Yeah. And now we got to help, move you guys in together just a couple months ago. And so now, the journey continues. And so it's really cool. And there are a lot of parts of that, why we've asked you to be a part of the conversation today, because we're going to hit on this again later. But, that moment, the way you chose to treat Matt in that moment, it's just something we've seen out of you so consistently, over the last decade now that we've known you in terms of how you treat people, interact with people, listen to people who don't see the world the way you do, etc. So that's a big part of the reason I want you to be a part of today's conversation. The other reason is because, several months ago now, right after the death of George Floyd, I don't know what it was. And I was telling Matt, I don't know if this is like a God thing. People talk about like God put somebody in your heart, or I don't know what it was, or if it was what I ate or whatever. I just kept thinking about you. And I was like, I like needed to reach out to Christian. And it felt like you were a safe space for me. It felt like you were a safe relationship that I could just go to and have an unfiltered conversation about everything we were seeing in the world, everything we were seeing on social media. And I think the way that I started that conversation with you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was just saying, as a white person, as a white male, I think the word I feel right now is confused. And I was like, that feels like the biggest thing to me. And I mean that like humbly. I don't mean that in an argumentative way. I meant it like, I'm seeing so much online of like, be silent and, elevate Black voices and let Black voices speak. And then I'm seeing a ton of, if you're silent, you're violent. And so now that's like the opposite, like you're spreading hate if you don't speak. It's just one example of things that seem to be like conflicting in terms of like, how can I help, or how can I learn, or how can, how do I get a grip or a grasp of what's happening right now? And you just let me ask like any question under the sun, however dumb or ignorant or insensitive or whatever it might have sounded. You just let me be really unfiltered and ask a lot of questions. And similarly, we talk about some moments we'll remember forever. I think I'm going to remember that night for a long time, if not forever. I think
same.
We were inside. We said 3 hours.
3.5, something like that.
Yeah, we got there at 6. It was after 9 or something.
It was dark.
And it was. By the time we left. Yeah. And I went home and with Emily, who's my wife, Emily, we like walked around the neighborhood for like another hour. And I just like recapped all these things that you had said and all these parts of your story that you had shared, because it was, it was so impactful to me in that moment. One of the things that I would love for you to share, and I do think it's important to clarify for people listening, this episode that just happened, and then this, specific conversation on this podcast, it's all about learning to listen to and connect with people. And usually that's harder when it's people that don't see the world the way we do, or that have a different experience than us. That's what this episode is about. So I really want to clarify, like, none of the 3 people here around this table are trying to say, like, this is what you must believe, this is what you must think, this is what you need to go do or not do. Like, we're not trying to say any of that. We're just trying to give tools for listening and growth and connection and stuff like that here. So that's the point of the conversation. I also said, like, ahead of time, I don't want, Matt or I to feel the pressure to speak for all white people, because we're just 2 guys, and I don't want Christian to have to speak for all Black people. Like, that's not the point of this. We can just speak from our experiences here today, and that's what we want to do. And hopefully it's helpful to some people listening. But one of the most emotionally impactful things for me, and you shared a ton that night, but one of the big ones for me was you used this phrase that your parents had with you, I think going into middle school. Was it going into high school?
You're talking about
the talk.
Yeah,
that was
so
what we phrased.
I had an older brother.
Yeah.
He was probably 8 years older, so I kind of heard it before, but middle school, I'd say.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Okay. So you had phrased it that way, and you had said the talk. And the reason that was like, funny and emotional to me was because, as a white kid, the talk is your parents sitting you down to talk to you about the birds and the bees about 4 or 5 years after you already heard about it from your friends in the locker room, right? And you're like, Mom and Dad, I know this is so awkward. And so that's the talk for me. And I remember having that talk with my parents. When you said the talk, you were talking about something completely different with a totally different context. And so I was wondering if you could give a little bit of that in terms of like your story, which is a story I don't have, a part of your world that's not a part of mine. I think it'd be helpful for people.
Okay. Yeah. So probably, like you said, probably early middle school. My parents they would throw little hints, don't, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that. But probably middle school is when they had like the serious, like, hey, you're getting old enough, you're getting to a point where stuff could get dangerous if you don't do certain things to keep you safe. And so basically the talk is like taking the extra measure to keep you safe. So One of those is like, don't go out at night and don't go running. Like I couldn't go exercise, take a jog at night because it could be dangerous, depending where you are or who could see you. Another thing is like if you run into police, comply at all times. And obviously when I got a car, it's a lot different, keep your hands on the wheel if you get pulled over, ask if you can get your wallet, different things like that. Never move too quick, ask if you can turn on the light, stuff like that. And so, I think that was something that was always in the back of my mind because I had an older brother, but never thought of, that's not going to happen to me. You know what I mean? But as you get older, obviously you realize like, that is a possibility, so you start listening and taking stuff in consideration. So, you had shared some things. I mean, I'm a runner. Like that's just the way I like to work. I was thinking about it, and it's thanks for sharing that. I tried to get you in there. I did my best shot. We bought this guy some nice running shoes, and then he wears them every single day. That's like not what you're supposed to do with your running shoes. But anyways, but you run in the morning and at night because we live in Texas. Like you know what I mean. I'm like I can't imagine if it was. You talked about going into a gas station and never like walking out without a receipt. I've never had my parents talk to me about how to be safe, in a gas station. And then I went out with my brother, right? So whenever he was driving me, it was kind of the same. I guess the same rules applied for me too. So always buy something you go in the gas station or store or whatever. Never walk out empty-handed. If you.
I think one of the most emotional ones for me, especially even as I was processing after and stuff, was when you talked about hands on the steering wheel when a police officer comes up. That was such an emotional moment because for me, when you are trained, like if you go through a class on how to handle a weapon, if you want to conceal a weapon or use a weapon, etc., and you have one in your car, what they're going to tell you to do is take the keys out, put them on the dashboard, put your hands on the steering wheel, and let the officer know, like, hey, I have a weapon in my car. Like, what would you like me to do with it? Well, you are basically saying, hey, I've been taught that like some people in this world, this is not all people. Again, we're not trying to make a statement about what is or isn't or any of that. But for you and your story and your experience, you're being taught that some people are going to see your body as a weapon. Like they're going to see the color of your skin as a weapon, essentially. And that was such an emotional like thing for me to process because I've just never had to think about myself that way. Like I've never had my parents have that conversation with me, and it was one example of, a part of your world and a part of your story that just hasn't been a part of mine. And that's not, again, we don't have to apply that to that is interesting. As a friend, as somebody I care about to hear about, I'm like, dang. And you had, as long as I've known you, like that had been your context. Yeah. Because I met you, freshman year, you were a freshman baseball player and I was a senior. And so the whole time I knew you, that had already been a part of your context. And I didn't know that till, I'm 27 years old, that you had, that conversation with your parents. So I thought that was just interesting when it comes to like listening and being open in other people's experience and other people's views on the world. That was a powerful one to me.
And kind of like what you said, you didn't know. I thought that was normal. So I thought everyone had
that's what you were saying.
Because I thought, you never know who you're going to run into. So I thought everyone had that conversation no matter who it was.
Yeah. Yep. But 100%. And another phrase that you kept using throughout the night was this idea of worlds. And I want to explain that to people just because I thought it was so helpful and so interesting to think about. And I think it came up. I know we started off joking about LeBron, but going back to LeBron James, who I am self-aware I talk about way too much. But
the GOAT.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm into that. I said, what was weird for me is I remember like 6 or 7 years ago, I attended this conference and I've gone to this conference every year since. And there's the same segment every single year where the leader, the CEO of this company will interview all kinds of different minorities. And so it'll be more minorities. He'll have women in leadership, et cetera, and just talk about their experiences. And I remember it being really eye-opening as a 19, 20-year-old at the time to just even begin to think about the fact that, my experience is not the only experience in the world and start to, step into other people's worlds. And the reason I was saying that was so interesting to me is because like growing up, like the closest thing I had to a childhood hero, like a celebrity hero, like if you were to ask me who it is, was a, 6'8", 260-pound black man, and it really was LeBron. And it was an on and off the court thing. Like I've shared some of this with Matt. It wasn't just like, he does awesome things on the court. Like he married his high school sweetheart. Everything that I see looks like he's a family man and a great father, starting schools and impacting our community. I grew up 30 minutes from where he was. He was drafted when I was in middle middle school and just got to like follow his whole journey in high school and been to his high school and, all that kind of cool stuff. And he's always been inspiring to me. I mean, I literally remember like in high school, I didn't want to like do homework and I'd watch a motivational video of LeBron, like working out in a gym or something at 5 a.m. in the morning. And, and then that would be the thing that would inspire me. So, I shared that and I'm like, gosh, it's weird to have that kind of a connection to him. And you said, well, I have a world that I connect in with him. Like growing up, Northeast Ohio is a world. It's a way that I relate to him that you actually don't. Mm-hmm. But then you have some worlds that you can connect with him in, in terms of being, a black athlete, a black man, etc. So would you have anything to like add to that or clarify that, like that concept of worlds, the way we can kind of relate to or step into each other's worlds?
Yeah, I think it's cool because we relate in a way, right?
Yeah.
But we do have two separate ways that we relate to each other.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. And then also, I think there's so many kind of worlds that connect different people. Mm-hmm. So me and Matt are connected through obviously God, but also baseball, right? Yep. Me and you, God, baseball.
Yeah.
But then me and Josh are connected. Josh knows way more about technology, computers, all that stuff,
spaceships,
than I'll probably ever know. But
right.
We're still connected because of church. So it's cool to see how everyone has many different worlds, but they all connect in different ways.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you had said that was so helpful was you talked about you have influence with the people that are in your mm-hmm. world. So I know there's a lot of people that are trying to influence the whole world right now, and that's great. And mm-hmm. I love the heart behind that. Mm-hmm. But part of the interesting thing about the social media generation is that like everybody pretends to be an expert on something really fast. Like mm-hmm. I read one article or I saw sometimes like one graphic, like one tweet or one whatever. Maybe I watched one YouTube video and now I'm an expert on this, mm-hmm. And it's like, well, be careful with that. But you do have influence in your world. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the ability you can influence your world and then you can learn from other worlds. Like you can, understand and connect with and try to empathize with the experience of people in other worlds. I thought was, so helpful. And I thought, that kind of idea of being an expert, we talked about, I had a class in college and you and I talked about this that night too. It was a cultural diversity flag at UT and the class was literally called Africans Americans in Sports. And so it was like this whole I was even experiencing the world of athletes, just any mm-hmm. student athlete, like guy, girl, black, white, whatever race, like their world is way different than mine in college because mm-hmm. it is like a professional job. Like the hours they put in, it is extraordinary. Like it controls your whole life, Mm-hmm. So it's interesting just getting access into that world and UT football players presenting and stuff like that. But then this professor has a doctorate in African American history. Like this guy has been studying for like 15 years on top of being a black man and having that experience, and is leading our conversations and is so graceful and humble about it that is so different from somebody like tweeting something that has no experience on the topic. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was just really helpful to think about, like, how can I influence my world and not try to like go influence a world I don't know about, but learn from the worlds I don't know about. Mm-hmm. I thought that was, you'd be more, that's what I took away. Mm-hmm. If you phrased it that way, like, that was what I heard or remembered from that night. And that was really cool. But do you have anything else you'd add to that, or there's another thing? It's okay if
no,
you don't.
I think you hit it on the nail.
Yeah. Cool. And then, so the third thing, and, Matt was talking about this a lot, and now he, gets to live with you and see this, even more, is that just when we think through our whole friend group, we know a lot of great people, a lot of great guys, but, you would be up there at the top of the list in terms of like your just grace, your humility, your gentleness with people who disagree with you, who see the world different than you, or who are just, straight attack you or, rude with you or whatever it might be. Matt had shared some stories of even guys like on the baseball team like tweeting racist things, mm-hmm. and then you got to go like practice with them for 3 hours a day and share a locker room with them and all that kind of stuff, and mm-hmm. not react and not so now I'm just speaking to you, like your character as a man, just as a human being. What where does that come from for you, or why do you choose to treat people that way?
I think kind of like what we talked about, the different worlds. They're in a different world than me, and then also I think it's you got to pick and choose your battles, right? And so to me, yes, they tweeted some stuff or whatever, but will I ever see them again? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and so why let that kind of affect me and what I'm doing in my future? And so for me, it was kind of understand their world. Their world's way different than mine. Mm-hmm. Kind of empathize with that and then move from it and say it's not worth my time because, you know, I've got stuff I got to do. And if I act a certain way towards them, that could affect me. So
yeah,
it could do more hurt for me to do something else than to just back off and let them do whatever.
Yeah. Do you ever give thought to like where that perspective like comes from for you? Cause you're relatively like young to have that perspective on life.
Yeah.
Like to some degree, that's what, you know, you hope your grandparents are thinking, but like, you know, for a young 20-year-old to be like, I'm thinking about my future. I'm thinking about the consequences. I'm thinking about this person's world and what's informed his world. Like that's a really mature way to look at people, especially people that are saying hurtful things and stuff. Have you just thought about like why you see the world that way?
Probably, I think it comes from me being calm, but also my family. So my dad's kind of the same exact way.
Yeah.
We rather, if something kind of affects us or makes us mad, if it's not worth it, we kind of just take a step back. It is what it is. It happened. Move from it. So I think that kind of is where it came from.
Yep.
And also through experience, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
And to that point too, something that I've learned from you, man, in terms of just like if we brought a God element back into it, the new command that Jesus gives all of his followers in terms of what we're supposed to do, if we want to be known as a Christian, if we want to be known as a follower of Jesus, you exemplified that time after time and time again in terms of like a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. That's what Jesus says to his followers. And by this, everyone will know that you are my follower if you love one another. And so even in that moment when we have guys, you know, you being one of two minorities in a 70-person baseball program, when someone tweets something, I hate this group and this group, you handled that and you answered the question of like, what does love require of me in that moment? And so I think something that we can learn from that is in this season when there's a lot of anger, righteous anger for what's happening in the world, in our anger, we should ask ourselves that question of like, what does love require of us? What does it really mean to show that sacrificial type of love, that love that Jesus has shown us, and love the people on the other side of the aisle, people who have different perspectives than us. And that's something that I've learned from you. That's something that I've learned just growing up through North Point, in terms of reaching to the other side of the aisle, people who have different, who see the world differently, don't see eye to eye with, me or anybody. And that question of like, what does love require of me? And part of it is listening. That answer can be different for a lot of different situations, but it's a good opportunity to just, in our anger, pause and ask that question of, hey, what does love require of me right now in this moment? And you've handled that beautifully with grace and humility and compassion for the people who don't see the world that you do. So
thank you. Yeah, and kind of going back to what you said, it was weird because I was obviously, it made me mad or whatever, but the thing that I was most worried about was that people would think it was the whole baseball team that thought that way. So I was more not thinking, I guess, about me and like whatever. I was thinking about, are people going to try to talk to Matt, all mad at Matt just because someone else tweeted something? And so it was a weird feeling I had. And I think maybe it was because it was senior year too and I wanted it to be good or whatever, but it was weird. I was more worried about my team than I guess him, because obviously he came. I think he was only there for a
couple weeks.
Yeah, a couple weeks. So
he was gone after that.
I was more worried like what's gonna happen after.
Yeah.
So I think that was the biggest thing, and maybe that's why I was so calm. Maybe.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, that's even in that, like you keep exemplifying this very like others focused mentality, thinking about how this impacts other people, and certainly not all people. And I don't want social media to represent like all people right now, because there's a lot of extremes that you see there. It's not really how actually people are living. But there's this very like kind of me focused, here's my views, here's what I think, here's how the world is right. And that's kind of this whole point of this conversation is exactly what you're saying. It's just, there's like, it costs you nothing, some time, some effort, but to like consider somebody else's world. That doesn't mean you have to adopt everything about their world. That doesn't mean you have to like take on all their opinions or all their beliefs or all their whatever, to just step in and try to understand their world a little bit. And I think you just do such a good job of that. And that's why it seemed like, so great to have you be a part of the conversation. And I think that's how I'd like to end. And I just, if there's anything else you guys want to add, just, kind of speak into, that's just personally what I would love to see people do more and more of, is like just a little bit less time on the internet, like a little bit less time on social media, perhaps, maybe filter out some of that completely and have more conversations, like just more time with the relationships and the people in our lives. Personally, with all the chaos right now, that's been far and away the most beneficial thing. I think about like our interactions have been like way more helpful than to a significant degree than any tweet I've seen, any YouTube video that I've seen, any quote, like any, that kind of stuff. And in those moments, I would love to see people do more of that. I was talking with you, Matt, like there's this big push for like solutions right now. I hear a lot of people, whether it's COVID or if it's Black Lives Matter or if it's political or if it's, going back to school, there's so much anger, and a lot of people will be like, okay, yeah, but tell me what to do. Like, what are the solutions? Like, what do you actually want different, And I told Matt, I don't know that this is going to resonate like a ton with students, but it's just so personal to me. Like being married to Emily, like that's a horrendous marriage strategy. Like if Emily's upset or angry and I'm like, okay, just let's fix it. Like what are we going to do? Like that is a recipe for disaster. Like all I'm supposed to do in that moment is be there with her, listen, understand. I don't think she's crazy by any stretch of the imagination, right? She's brilliant. She's wise. Like I'm going to sit there and like, what has led to this moment of conflict? What's upset her? What can I learn? How can I just sit in it and not like avoid the conflict and run with it? And I feel like there's so many issues in our culture right now, speak to whatever it is, that it's just like, okay, I agree. Like solutions, I want to have productive conversations and what do we actually do? But like, it feels like we're skipping a step when we do that. And that's just like, hey, just go be with people right now. Like just go listen to somebody that has a different view than you on whatever it might be. Maybe you change your mind, maybe you don't. I'm not sure. It's just, but you can listen and be with, and that's a big point, big part of this episode.
One thing I'll add to that too is, with everything going on in the world right now, even if we take it more to a personal level, like, knowing going forward that you and a friend will get into a fight, knowing that you and your boyfriend or your girlfriend will get into a fight, someone's going to see just having that general knowledge of that someone is going to see the world differently than you, take any topic on the board, right? Knowing that in your justified anger in whatever situation, do not sin, do not be so angry that it hurts and costs the relationship. And so that goes back to the question of like, hey, in your justified anger in whatever situation, ask that question of what does love require of me right now? Yeah. And even to what you were saying, like, listen. So a good example of this is a couple months ago when the protest, I don't think it was right after the death of George Floyd, but it was when the protest started. Like I was confused. I was like, should we find solutions? Should we pray? Should we do what should we do about what's happening and what we're seeing right now? And I felt something on my heart of like, I need to listen to my best friend, my brother, who has grown up differently than me. And I think that conversation was like 2 hours. And I feel like I learned so much from just that one conversation, rather than like having my anger, having my heart stirred and being mad and, posting something or tweeting something or doing all these things that, in my own way is justified. I'm angry about the things that I'm seeing in the world. But when that question comes like, hey, what does love require of me right now? That usually is what God is trying to tell you of like, hey, you should probably go do that. So when we pause in that moment and ask that question, it can change a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think that this concept of stepping into people's worlds is so universally applicable, because I think when you do that, I want to be careful. I haven't thought through this a lot, but I'm like, I think at the end of the day, you end up most of the time discovering we're way more alike than we are different in terms of like the most essential things in life. Like you are a human being, like you are made in the image of God. That's true. Like Jesus died for all of us, whatever the topic is. I don't have a topic in my mind as I say that. I'm just saying like in any disagreement you have with anybody on anything, the more you try to move in their direction, it's like there's all of this like anger and chaos that is just like kind of dissolved a little bit. And we could apply that to anything. Like, I mean, if you're a football player and you step in the world of what's it like to be in band, like if you're extroverted and you have tons of friends, what's it like to step in the world of an introvert who has a tough time making friends and has a hard time socially in middle school or high school or whatever it is? If you have a great, stable, loving family, awesome. Like, have you ever stepped in the world of somebody who doesn't have that and like doesn't come to school with that or go home to that every single day? There is so much to be gained, in this stage of life in middle school and high school, but for all of your life and beyond by stepping into people's worlds and doing what we're talking about in this conversation. So Yeah, I think what we talked about, is at stake, is if you don't do this, you'll not learn. You will not grow. Like, you will stay stuck as you are. You'll never consider new perspectives, and your relationships are always going to be shallow. Like, if you just can't like talk to people about things you disagree with, and you have a need to be right, like, you're probably going to lose a lot of them, or they'll just stay shallow. Like, they'll just never go to a deeper, more connective level than that. And whatever it would be, I desire very much the opposite for people. So, anything else that you guys just been on the tip of your tongue or heart before we kind of wrap it?
For me, kind of just to piggyback on what you guys said, that's something that helps me kind of deal with what you guys just said.
Yeah.
Is you never know what someone's going through. So I've learned that, especially in college. It's huge. People aren't going to tell you everything in their life, and unless it's out there, right?
Yeah.
People are very private, and so someone could say something to you, act a certain way, and you never know why, and it's probably justified through what's going on in their life, whether it's something that's stressing them out, something that happened family-wise, something, just everything, right? And so it's crazy just to, and now looking back, and especially in college, just how you never know at all. Someone could be going through crazy things and just bottle it all in, and then it explodes on you.
Yeah.
And so,
that's so deep. I don't even know if people can comprehend what you, I mean, what you just said. Like, people, in my opinion, I could be wrong. People aren't angry about politics. They're angry about what their dad said. People aren't, mad about, they're angry about that their mom isn't there. They're angry, about a hurt. We're all wounded. We all have our stuff. We all have our junk. We all have our sin. We're all going through our things. And it comes out in random issues that we choose to, get vocal about. But, oh my gosh, it's so much that people are going through. You just never know. You never know. I think the most extreme example of that I've seen recently that like people would know is the Chadwick Boseman, the Black Panther actor, to say like a 4-year battle with cancer that nobody knew about. And he was getting ripped online. Like, he was getting ripped on social media. Oh my gosh, this guy's on drugs. This guy isn't taking care of himself.
Looks exhausted.
Like,
at
he's
the
letting
slam
himself
dunk.
go. Yeah. They're like, what the heck? And oh yeah, he's been battling, stage 4 cancer and passed away from that. And like, people are like, eating their words, and oh my gosh, I wish I knew. And so that assumption that you just never know, that's amazing. I love that. Well, Christian, thank you for being on here, man. Thank you for all your time with, Matt and I personally, and having these conversations and being real and vulnerable with them. And, you've just been so gracious with them, and it really is awesome to have a safe place. And I hope people, find that for themselves. I hope they find those safe relationships where they can have, whatever the conversation is for them that they want to explore and tap into another world. 'Cause I think there's so much hanging in the balance. So thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully something we talked about here was helpful for you today, and we'll see you on the next podcast.